Well, hello everyone, and I am almost live. We were all set to do a live stream. YouTube's live streams went down, but we've got the power to record, so this is getting to you almost live. So I welcome, even though we don't have an opportunity to chat, I welcome your comments below, and I'll go in over the next couple of days and check and answer any questions. So today's recipe is a caramel apple upside down cake, and I'm really excited about it for the main reason is that just moments ago I pulled my cake out of the oven. This is the one I'm going to flip and show you. So it takes 45 minutes to bake, and then you have to let it cool for half an hour in order for the cake not to break, the caramel to settle into place. So you will get a beautiful reveal, but I wanted to let you know that the kitchen smells fantastic. So for all of you who regularly catch my live streams, hello Bonnie and Suzanne and Esme and Lori and Kathy. I'm so glad, and Mom, of course. I'm so glad you could join me, and I'm gonna get right to the recipe, which starts with, of course, making caramel. This is an upside down cake, and usually you would make a butter brown sugar mixture if you were making sort of a traditional pineapple upside down cake, but I am actually caramelizing sugar, and that is the syrup at the bottom of this cake recipe. So it's kind of like apple tart tatin meets a cake. Whenever I caramelize sugar, I put my water in my pot, and I'm putting in a little lemon juice. That helps keep the sugar liquefied as it's cooking and caramelizing. I put the water in first, so then the sugar immediately starts dissolving, as you can see there. Now I'll take this over to my burner over high heat. And I'll give it a little tap of extra water in the middle so it dissolves. This will probably take about 6 minutes to caramelize. When you're caramelizing sugar, you don't want to stir the sugar because you don't want sugar droplets to hit the side of the pot. Because if they hit the side of the pot away from the heat, they cool and they're at risk of crystallizing at that point. And sugar crystals are just like frost. Even though here in Southern Ontario in Canada, we're starting to say goodbye to winter, you don't want those frost-like crystals because when you have one piece of crystal, another will stick to it and it grows and grows and grows and spreads. And that's how your sugar might crystallize and seize up. So the key is to always have a little brush with some just room temperature water on hand. And if you see your sugar bubbling up and hitting the sides, you can give it a little brush. You don't stick your brush right in the sugar, just let that water flow from the brush down the pot. But really, you shouldn't have to attend to it too much. I'm just getting a little bit of bubbles, so I will turn away and take a peek at it every now and again. But there are a couple of elements to this upside down cake. So first I've got the caramel at the bottom, next will be the apples, and then I will make the cake batter that goes on top, and all these flavors match and marry together so beautifully. I've got a regular 9-inch, 23-centimeter cake pan here. I have greased it, bottom and sides, and I've lined the bottom with parchment paper. This isn't a syrupy, sticky cake that creates its own syrup when you turn it out. The apples absorb that caramelized sugar. So I like the parchment at the bottom of the paper just to make tipping it out so much simpler. Now let's talk about the apples for a second. As I take a look at my sugar, it's coming along well. I've already peeled, cored, and wedged my apples. And I want to talk about apples because it's March. And if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, you're just entering into fall, so it's time to talk about apple desserts. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're entering into spring, so it's talking about using up those last apples of the seasons before we say hello to the new seasonal fresh fruit. These are Mutsu apples. It's a lovely yellow-green apple. They're found across Canada. Sometimes they're sold as crispin. Your equivalent, no matter where you are, I think Granny Smith apples are available pretty much everywhere. A Granny Smith apple is the ideal. It's tart, it holds its shape, and that's what you want in your apple for this cake recipe. I peeled and cored these apples about an hour ago, so they're just starting to discolor now, but you know, I don't worry about it because of course I'm pouring caramel on top of this. So normally you would think, oh, well, the syrup goes in the pan first and then the apples, but I actually want the apples to go in the pan first, and then I'll pour the caramel on top of them. So I'll arrange them closely together, and it depends on the size of your apple. You may need 2, you may need 3. Sometimes Granny Smiths can be a little small, in which case you want 3. Mutsus are a generously proportioned apple. They are one of my favorite apples for apple pie. There we go. So all in a single layer, so that way when you turn the cake upside down, or right side up, I should say, you'll see those apples. So I'll just set that aside for a second and take another look at my sugar, see how it's coming along. Michael has set up a stove cam, so we're catching a look at that, Michael?
Yes.
And just a reminder, this is an almost live stream. I'm baking for you live today. YouTube didn't want anyone to broadcast live this evening. They're having their technical difficulties, but we'll post, you'll see this video, and I'll keep an eye on the comments so at least we can interact, because that's what I love about these live streams. All right, I'm not developing any color, and you can really go, when you know you're starting to get close to your sugar caramelizing, you can see that your bubbles, the sugar bubbles, as it boils away, they start to look bigger. That's because the sugar is starting to thicken and hold in the air as it's boiling. And so you know you're getting a little close. And I also can tell by the hiss. When I start adding the water and it really starts to sizzle, I know soon I'll be getting my sugar taking on color. So in the meantime, I think I have about 1 minute before that sugar starts to turn. So I'm going to separate my eggs because this cake recipe calls for whipped egg whites folded into the batter. So my whites, I'm gonna whip first. If you're using electric beaters, you can make your cake base first and whip your egg whites afterwards if you wish. But I'm not going to step aside to wash dishes, so I'm going to take care of the egg whites first. There we go, and multitasking. I'm starting to get a little caramel color. Are you on the sauce can? You keep an eye on that caramelized sugar for me, Michael.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. So this recipe calls for 4 eggs. I think, do I have enough time for? I do. 1 more egg white, and then I'll pull that caramelized sugar off the heat.
Suspenseful music.
Oh, I know. No kidding.
It's getting color.
All right, it's coming off the heat. Now I've got my 60 grams of butter ready because look at that beautiful amber color, and it smells fantastic. Oh, and you add your butter a little at a time, and this is going to start cooling down the sugar, so it'll stop cooking. And this is, you're making a butter caramel sauce. Of course, if we were live right now, I know someone would be typing, could I add sea salt to that? And the answer would be 100%, yes, you could. But whenever you're making a confection, when you're cooking sugar, you always add your salt at the very end because salt can interfere with the candying process, so it gets added at the very end.
Don't stick your finger in there.
No, do not. And as much as kids love caramel, making caramel is not a kid's activity. You gotta let it cool. It is, caramelized sugar is about 310 to 340 degrees Fahrenheit. That's how hot it is. And look at that beautiful butter caramel. And now I'll bring my pan of apples back. And you don't, when you're pouring the caramel on top, don't expect the caramel to fully cover the apples. But now those apples, the juices are gonna cook out as this cake bakes and liquefy that caramel a little further, and then some of it absorbs into the cake. So you get that beautiful sort of spongy, syrupy top layer to this cake, and then a more defined cake layer underneath. So I'll set this aside to cool. My hand just stuck to the pot there. Actually, no, let's keep looking at it right now while I whip my 4 egg whites. So I'm not adding any sugar to my egg whites, and I'm going to whip them to a soft peak. They will not look like a big pillowy meringue because there's no added sugar. And when you're whipping egg whites without sugar, they hit a soft peak a lot faster. Of course, my egg whites are at room temperature, which allows them to reach a higher volume a lot faster. And room temperature egg whites are very important in the case that you are adding sugar to your egg whites, so that the sugar can dissolve, liquefy, and give your egg whites that volume and structure. See, it really doesn't take long for those egg whites to whip up when there's no sugar. I think just so I don't spill, I'm gonna move my apples out of the way. Let's take a little peek here. So it looks frothy. You can see large and small air bubbles, but I do have a bit of volume and structure. I'm gonna give this another 15 seconds. There we go. It is rare that you will ever see a cake recipe call for egg whites whipped. When the egg whites are folded into a batter, it's rare you'll see a recipe call for them whipped to stiff peak. That is typically only for meringues that are going to be baked or used on their own. Because the point of whipping the egg whites is to help give your cakes volume. Before the days of baking powder and baking soda, this was really all you had. And so those egg whites need room and space to grow. So I'll set these aside. I've got a lot of parts to this recipe, but yet it's one cake. Ultimately, your prep time for this recipe isn't too long. If you get everything organized first and start in that order, have your apples ready, make your caramel, whip your egg whites, and now for the cake base, which is actually the final part of the recipe. So I have my unsalted butter, and because I'm playing on the caramel flavor, I've got a combination of dark brown sugar. I'm using Demerara sugar here, and I'm using granulated. So equal amounts. And I can anticipate that someone would ask, could I use all brown sugar in this recipe? You could, but I would reduce it by about 25 grams because you're adding extra moisture if you're using a Demerara style sugar, and it could make the cake just a little bit too heavy. So now I'm going to cream my butter and sugar together. Because of the small amount of butter in this cake base, don't forget I put 60 grams of butter or a quarter cup in the caramel, so that's going to cook into the cake. So I didn't need a whole lot of butter in the cake base itself. So you'll find this won't turn out to be creamy initially. I will add my little bit of vanilla. And now I'll add those egg yolks from the whites I separated. And in addition to that, I'm going to add a bit of sour cream. This really, the tanginess of the sour cream against the sweetness of the caramel and then the tart fruitiness of the apples You need the liquid in there. You could use buttermilk. I know sour cream isn't available everywhere. If you use a full-fat yogurt, and I'll be honest, when I was making my recipe, I didn't realize I was low on sour cream. So this is actually half yogurt and half sour cream, and it works absolutely fine in this recipe. And this is quite fluid at this point. I'll just give my mixer a little scrape just to make sure everything's nice and smooth. Looking good. And now to sift the dry ingredients. My flour, just all-purpose flour. And someone, when we were trying to go live, and I was just, that's not sifting my flour, is it? I need you, I miss you, you keep me in check. When we were chatting, when we were trying to go live, but weren't able to, someone asked, how do I substitute self-raising flour with all-purpose flour? And what I do, for every 1 cup or 150 grams of all-purpose flour, self-raising flour, I use the same measure of all-purpose, and I add 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, and I find that generally works. You can add a pinch of salt too, but I find proportionately for most cake recipes that the balance comes out fine. So I've got my flour almost sifted, and now I'm going to add my baking powder, a little bit of salt, and then I'm adding a teaspoon of cinnamon to really just play on that caramel apple flavor. If you wanted to use a spice mix, like a pumpkin spice blend, that would be absolutely fine. Whatever you like in your apple pie, I say add it here. All right, now on low speed, I'll just add this to my mixer. If you're using electric beaters, just do the same thing. Gentle swirling motion with the beaters as you add your flour. You can also add this by hand if you want. And you'll mix this just until it's combined. Thanks, Michael. Okay, so now that I've got the dry ingredients combined, I'll just finish doing it by hand, and I'll take a moment and get the mixer out of the way. There we go. If this ends up being a big hit and you like this format, we may end up coming up with our own different series. Almost live.
Quasi-live.
Yes, baking almost live with Anna. It does feel odd to not have you here to talk to, but just as a reminder, I will be keeping an eye on the chat thread that follows underneath the recipe. You know I always supply the full recipe. It's right below the screen. So you can see this apple cake has quite a thick batter to it right now. And of course, it'll be lightened with the egg whites. But when you make an upside down cake, you actually don't want a batter that's too runny, because it can then run down and seep underneath the fruit, and then the fruit gets picked up into the cake. And that's definitely something we don't want to happen. So these egg whites, even though they were whipped to a lovely soft peak, you will find once they've sat for a few minutes, they'll sort of set up a little bit. Just let them be. Don't re-whip them. Don't try and deflate them and whip them again. Just you work with them. But because there is no sugar, you will find they collapse in the cake batter. And that first addition of egg whites is always your sacrificial addition. You expect those egg whites to deflate fully, but don't worry, they've got volume memory and they will expand again within the batter. It also makes the batter a little easier to handle. So now when I add the remaining whites, these will work in more easily. And if you've watched my cake videos before that involve folding egg whites, you know I would rather you go faster and a little less gently than too gently and too slow, because time is actually your enemy here more than anything else. Okay, so I no longer see any white streaks, except for that one. There we go, goodbye. And I'll bring my pan back with the apples. And you can see there's a little bit of juice, but the caramel, it's soft. It's cooled down a bit that you can touch it because of the butter, but it hasn't solidified. And now the batter goes on top. All right, my neighbor Bonnie, I know you're watching, always gets a part of what I make, so that's why I'm always careful. You want to scrape your bowl. And then just loosely spread this. It will level itself as it bakes. There we go. And this goes into a 350 oven, and it takes 45 minutes. Think of all the juices from the apples underneath, plus the caramel sauce. They're liquefying, cooking, and then that's producing steam that's adding moisture to this cake. And so it takes a lot longer to bake. If you've ever made an apple pie spends a good hour in the oven for the same reason. So I just want to give you, I'm going to pop this in the oven, but show you that side by side. Can we see that in the overhead shot? So you can see how the cake really does come up nicely to the top of the pan. If you're nervous about the height of your pan, or if you have a lot of apples, you can put your cake pan on a baking tray because you don't want to be cleaning caramel sauce from the bottom of your oven. In this goes. And now it's time to flip this now cooled cake. It's been about half an hour, hasn't it, Michael?
Yes.
Good, 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 good. And I'm just going to make sure the cake is loosened around the sides. You don't have to grease and flour this pan. Well, you don't want to because you have the caramel sauce at the bottom.
And unlike a tarte tatin, which has so many apples that liquefy and produces syrup, the cake absorbs the syrup. So I don't find this is risky to flip over. It's not juicy. But it will have that
syrup glossiness. Beautiful. And the parchment stayed in the pan. And I do find, you've seen the thumbnail image, it always does that. I get that beautiful sort of ombre look where it's super caramelized around the edges and cooked just so in the center. So those apples are nice and tender. There's steam coming off of this, and I can smell the caramel and the cinnamon. Let me cut a slice so you can see the inside. Says the girl who just really wants a slice of cake. And Michael, would you like a slice? Should I cut one for you?
Oh, I'm fine, but thank you.
You sure?
Okay,
Okay.
I totally want it.
All right, one for me and one for Michael. It's fruit, yes. And I do find because of the apples, this cake stays moist for a couple of days. It's just, oh, look at that. So you've got the apples cooked through that sweet caramel layer, but it's not overly sweet and it's balanced with the cake itself. This would be delicious with a scoop of ice cream, or however you take your apple pie. Is anyone a fan of a slice of cheddar cheese with their apple pie? Do you like cheddar with your apple pie, Michael?
My father had every piece of apple pie in his life with a piece of
Your
cheddar.
dad did, but I don't know that I've seen you eat a...
Yeah.
Yeah?
Occasion.
Okay. That's yours, Michael. I'll just pass it down to you. Now, a lovely bite. It's think about it, all that fruit at the bottom is steaming the cake. So it has not a pudding consistency, but it really has a nice moisture to it. Oh, I look forward to seeing the questions and notes, because this almost live stream, it's always important for me to connect to you. So I welcome you to write your comments. I'll keep revisiting the video as you can watch it at your leisure now, because it's not live anymore. But I'll answer your questions. I thank you for your support. For new viewers, welcome to the Oh Yum channel. I've got lots of new content planned, rolling out over the entire spring, actually. But next up will be a live stream Tuesday, March, today's the 5th? So the 12th. Yes, Tuesday, March 12th at 6 p.m. I am making my decadent lemon squares. A few of you have requested a lemon square recipe. A few of you have also requested sugar-free desserts. I have this recipe, I have tested traditional, the way I created it, and I have verified that it can be made sugar-free. So you have to join me on March 12th for my creamiest, dreamiest, loveliest lemon squares. But first, a bite of caramel apple cake, and I thank you for joining me, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks for coming to Oh Yum and watching some deliciousness. Caramel first, boom, the apple hits you, and then you get the cinnamon cake. That's good cake.